From chaos comes order. Before there was earth, before there was sky, before there was even time itself, there was chaos. The poets of ancient Greece spoke of it in hushed tones, not as a storm or a violent chasm, but as an endless, yawning void. Imagine standing at the edge of night, with no stars above, no ground beneath your feet, and no sense of direction. This was chaos, the state before creation. From that shapeless expanse, all things would emerge, the raw ingredients of reality, the framework upon which myth and memory were built. Chaos was not evil, nor was it good. It simply was, an empty potential, the blank canvas of existence. Hesiod, the farmer poet of Boeotia, who lived around the 7th century BCE, gave us the most enduring account of this beginning in his Theogony. In his vision, chaos first produced Erebus, the deep darkness, and Nyx, the night. From their union came Ether, the radiant light, and Hemera, the day. And then, as if responding to some deep, invisible need, the earth itself emerged. She was Gaia, broad-bosomed and ever fertile, the ground upon which the story of gods and mortals would forever rest. The Greeks were not alone in imagining a universe born from void. Mesopotamian myths spoke of mingling waters, Egyptian tradition of a primeval mound rising from none, the waters of chaos. What makes the Greek account distinct is its deeply human sensibility. Chaos is not a god with a face or a voice, but a concept, a word meant to explain the inexplicable. For a culture that prized poetry, the Greeks wrapped their science in metaphor. To them, chaos was both nothing and everything, a reminder that order arises only after disorder. From Gaia came Uranus, the starry sky, who stretched himself over her vast body. From their union the heavens and the earth became inseparable partners, clasped in an eternal embrace. But before we arrive at their child, Ren, the titans who will soon shake this fragile cosmos, we must linger on this moment, the transition from nothingness to structure, from chaos to cosmos. There are fragments, preserved by philosophers, that suggest some Greeks saw chaos not as disorder, but as chasm, a great gaping gap. This interpretation changes the flavour entirely. Rather than formless matter, chaos was space itself, the hollow room in which creation could occur. Scholars still debate whether Hesiod intended chaos to be a thing, a place, or simply an idea. The ambiguity may have been deliberate. After all, beginnings are never entirely clear. In our modern scientific imagination, we might compare this chaos to the singularity before the Big Bang, an incomprehensible state of potential where time and space themselves had not yet unfolded. Just as scientists today use equations and particle accelerators to sketch the unseeable, the Greeks turned to story and verse. Their chaos was not measurable, but it explained why there was something instead of nothing. One curious, less-known thread of myth places chaos not at the beginning, but as an ever-present backdrop still existing behind the veil of our ordered world. Some Orphic hymns, attributed to a mystical sect in antiquity, speak of chaos as an eternal principle that never truly disappeared. In that telling, the world was not born once, but is reborn continually, drawn again and again from the well of nothingness. This cyclical vision was more fringe, but it carried weight among initiates who sought mysteries beyond the common temples. The Greeks, of course, were not writing for bedtime comfort, but to impose shape on a confusing world. The story of chaos assured them that even the most frightening emptiness could yield beauty. Out of void came earth, sky, darkness, and light, the balance of opposites that would define Greek thought for centuries. Where there had been nothing, now there was duality, night and day, earth and sky, disorder and order. It is worth noting that while Hesiod placed chaos first, not all Greeks agreed. Later writers like Ovid, the Roman poet drawing on Greek traditions, spoke of a rudis indigestaque moles, a crude, unshaped mass of elements already mingled, more like a swirling storm than a silent gap. The difference seems small, but it tells us something profound about myth. Each retelling reshapes the origin to fit the needs of its audience. Was the world born from silence or from noise, from stillness or from swirling matter? The answer depended on what troubled you most, the terror of nothingness or the terror of too much. And so, in the hush of chaos, with its formless void stretching infinitely in every direction, we find the first heartbeat of story. Out of nothing comes something. Out of silence comes a murmur. Out of the abyss comes earth and sky, gods and monsters, hope and terror alike. This is how the Greeks began their tale, not with an explosion, nor with a divine architect carefully arranging matter, but with a gap, a nothingness that births everything. Already we sense a pattern. The Greeks did not shy away from paradox. They embraced it, turning contradictions into myths, weaving mystery into narrative. For them, chaos was not a problem to be solved, but a truth to be accepted. As we move forward, keep in mind this first truth. The gods themselves were born into a universe already in motion, already alive with tensions between dark and light, earth and sky. The drama of Greek mythology is not the creation of the world from scratch, but the struggle of powers that emerge within it. The stage has been set, the curtain drawn, and the players, though not yet born, are waiting in the wings. The cosmos is ready. Gaia and Uranus will soon meet, and from their union will come beings of unimaginable power, beings who will challenge their parents and reshape the destiny of heaven and earth. But for now, we linger in the hush that follows chaos, the quiet before the storm. Primordial forces awaken. From the silent expanse of chaos, forms began to stir. They were not yet the personalities we might recognize as gods with temples and statues, but principles of existence given life through story. Among the first was Gaia, the earth itself, solid and nourishing, the mother who would carry all that followed. Alongside her rose Tartarus, the pit of unthinkable depth, a shadowed counterpart beneath the earth, where light could never reach, and with them came Eros, not the playful cherub we would later imagine, but a primal force of attraction, the binding energy that compelled matter and spirit to unite. These primordial beings were more than mythic characters. They were explanations for the world's foundations. Gaia was not simply a goddess, she was the ground beneath Greek feet. Nyx, the goddess of night, was the literal darkness that swept across the Aegean skies. In this way, mythology blurred seamlessly into lived experience. Each dusk, when the stars emerged, Greeks saw Nyx stretching her veil overhead, while her children, Hypnos, sleep, and Thanatos, death, moved silently among mortals. There is a striking beauty in how these early forces emerge not as chaotic demons, but as dignified powers. Erebus, the embodiment of shadow, and Nyx, the deep night, were even feared by Zeus himself in later stories. When night fell in Homer's epics, it was not a simple transition of hours, it was Nyx herself, and even the mightiest god hesitated to defy her. Scholars still debate whether this reflects an older stratum of religion, when these primordial forces were once worshipped more directly before being overshadowed by the Olympians. Consider Eros. In Hesiod's account, Eros appears at the very dawn of creation, long before Aphrodite would inherit his name and domain. Here, Eros is cosmic necessity, the invisible reason atoms cling together, why earth me. Eats sky, why gods beget children. Later philosophers would reinterpret this Eros as an allegory for desire itself, the vital pulse behind all art, politics, and even philosophy. Plato famously turned him into a symbol of the soul's yearning for truth. But in the beginning, he was simply a power that could not be resisted, ensuring the cosmos would not remain barren. From Gaia and chaos came more children, some benevolent, others terrifying. Pontus, the sea, rose to lap against Gaia's shores, and with him the endless waves and storms. The Greeks, seafarers by nature, felt his moods in every voyage, sometimes gentle, sometimes murderous. Nyx's brood included beings both feared and whispered about, the Fates, who spun and cut the thread of human lives. Moros, doom, and Nemesis, retribution itself. Quirky fragments of myth even suggest that from Nyx also came Aparte, the personification of deceit, reminding us that night hides both dreams and dangers. It is here we notice something curious. Unlike later myths filled with clear genealogies and rivalries, these primordial forces often exist beside each other without conflict. Gaia does not war with Tartarus, Nyx does not scheme against Erebus. Instead, they coexist, defining the parameters of existence. Only when Uranus, the starry sky, clasps Gaia in his embrace does conflict begin to brew. Perhaps this reflects how early humanity viewed the world, not yet as a battlefield of personalities, but as a mosaic of forces to be respected. A fringe version of the cosmogony tells us that Phanes, a radiant deity of light and creation, burst forth from a cosmic egg laid in the womb of darkness. This vision comes from the Orphic tradition, a mystical branch of Greek religion with its own hymns and rites. To the Orphics, the universe began not with chaos, but with this egg cracked open to reveal shimmering life. Whether this was a rival tradition or a secret teaching running parallel to mainstream myth, scholars still debate. Yet the idea of a cosmic egg connects Greek imagination to myths far afield. In Hindu, Chinese, and even Finnish traditions, the world hatches from an egg, a universal symbol of potential. And while the mainstream Hesiodic tale prevailed, these fringe Orphic stories remind us that mythology was never static. Just as today we tell origin stories with science documentaries, alternate versions thrived in antiquity, each serving a different purpose. The farmer might pray to Gaia for fertile fields, while the mystic intoned hymns to Phanes for spiritual rebirth. Both were valid, both were woven into the tapestry of Greek belief. Archaeological evidence suggests that cults dedicated to these primordial forces did exist, albeit quietly. In southern Italy, inscriptions have been found invoking Nyx and Eros in mystery rites, hinting at a more intimate reverence than the grand temples of Zeus or Apollo. One inscription calls Nyx the nurse of the gods, as though even the Olympians required her care. These fragments remind us that behind the shining marble temples stood older, darker traditions rooted in night and earth. When we pause here, on the threshold between chaos and cosmos, the stage is beginning to feel crowded. Gaia spreads her fertile body, Nyx drapes her cloak of darkness, Erebus broods in the shadows, Tartarus yawns below, and Eros binds all together with unseen cords. It is a universe, see both elegant and terrifying, ordered yet always on the edge of collapse. But the harmony will not last. Soon Gaia will birth Uranus, the sky, and in their union lies both promise and peril. Their children, the Titans, will inherit not only the vastness of heaven and earth, but also the seeds of rivalry. For now, though, let us hold on to this early stillness, when primordial forces shaped existence, not with swords or thunderbolts, but simply by being. The cosmos is awake, and its children are restless. The rise of Gaia and Uranus. The quiet stirrings of the primordial world soon gave way to a drama more familiar to us, the story of family, love, and conflict. From Gaia, the ever-fertile earth, came Uranus, the starry sky. He stretched himself across her, a glittering canopy of constellations, vast and eternal. The poets described their union with a sense of inevitability, earth and sky, forever entwined, their embrace the beginning of life as we know it. Together, they would populate the cosmos with beings of staggering power, children who would shape the destiny of gods and mortals alike. Uranus was not merely a dome of stars. In the Greek imagination, he was both a physical reality and a personality, a divine presence pressing down upon Gaia, enclosing her children, refusing them room to breathe. This oppressive quality would become his undoing, but in the early moments, he and Gaia stood as the ultimate pair, the first cosmic marriage. From them sprang the first generation of true deities, the Titans, beings vast in stature and significance, embodiments of fundamental aspects of nature and time. The 12 Titans are worth naming, for they will dominate our story. Oceanus, the endless river encircling the world. Coeus, the axis of heaven. Creus, associated with the ram and the measure of seasons. Hyperion, lord of the heavenly light. Iapetus, progenitor of mortality. Thea, goddess of shining brilliance. Rhea, who would one day mother the Olympians. Themis, embodiment of divine law. Mnemosyne, memory itself. Phoebe, the radiant moon. Tethys, the nourishing sea. And Cronus, the youngest, ambitious and shrewd. This family tree may seem sprawling, yet it reflects the Greek effort to anchor every observable force of life, memory, law, the sea, the moon, in a genealogy. The world was not random. It had parents, siblings, and rivalries. In telling these stories, the Greek S gave cosmic order a human shape. But Gaia and Uranus did not stop with the Titans. From their union also came the Cyclopes, one-eyed smiths of thunder and lightning, and the hecaton-sharers, monstrous beings with 50 heads and 100 hands each. These children, terrifying to Uranus, became symbols of unbridled chaos within creation. Unwilling to let them roam, Uranus forced them deep into Gaia's womb, hiding them away in the dark interior of the earth. This was no gentle act. Imagine Gaia, the vast mother, her belly swelling with imprisoned children, unable to release them. Her anguish is a metaphor for the Earth's own turbulence, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, the restless churning beneath our feet. Yet it is also a deeply human story of domination and suppression. A father terrified of his offspring, a mother grieving for the children denied their freedom. Scholars still debate whether this reflects an older agricultural myth of seeds buried in the soil, awaiting liberation. Was Uranus's repression symbolic of winter's grip on the earth, and Cronus's later rebellion the breaking forth of spring? The layers of interpretation run deep. Here lies a fascinating contrast. In many other cultures, the sky god is benevolent. In Mesopotamia, Anu presides serenely. In Egypt, Nut arches protectively. But in Greece, Uranus becomes cruel, fearful of his own children. This tension between heaven and earth, between paternal authority and maternal fertility, would echo through all of Greek mythology. One lesser-known strand of tradition even claimed Uranus himself was the first king of the universe, ruling not with kindness but with iron severity. A fragment preserved by the historian Diodorus Siculus tells us that Uranus taught men the science of the stars, mapping constellations and dividing the year into seasons. In this version, he is less tyrant and more teacher, a culture bringer whose legacy was written in the heavens. Such accounts, though less popular, remind us that mythology was never fixed. Uranus could be feared oppressor or wise astronomer, depending on who told the tale. Still, the dominant narrative is one of growing tension. Gaia, burdened with her hidden children, began to resent Uranus's suffocating presence. She loved her offspring and longed to see them free. The murmurs of discontent grew louder within her, as though the very earth itself was groaning. This is the point where myth transforms into drama, where the abstract forces of creation take on the recognizable shape of rebellion. A quirky tidbit tucked into some local traditions tells of Uranus showering the earth with rain as a form of fertilization. his seed falling as drops from the sky. In these stories, every rainfall was his embrace of Gaia, a blending of physical reality with divine metaphor. Farmers in ancient Greece, depending so desperately on the heavens for crops, may well have seen in each storm a reminder of this cosmic union. But harmony could not last. Just as chaos had yielded to order, so too would the marriage of earth and sky yield to strife. Gaia's children were too powerful, too restless to remain hidden forever. She herself would soon conspire to break Uranus's hold, to bring her offspring into the open. And in that conspiracy lies the seed of the first true war of succession in mythology, a pattern that would repeat generation after generation as sons challenged fathers and new orders replaced the old. Before that clash erupts, however, we must recognize the moment of promise. For here, in the union of Gaia and Uranus, the cosmos is populated, the Titans are born, the Cyclopes blink into being, the 100-handed giants stir, the universe, once silent and empty, now teems with divine presences, each destined to play a role in shaping history. It is the rise of a family both magnificent and doomed. A family that, in time, would fracture under its own weight. But for now, they are united under the vast sky and the enduring earth, their story waiting to unfold. The birth of the Titans. From the union of Gaia and Uranus came a brood of power unmatched, a dynasty whose names would echo through temples, poems, and whispered prayers for centuries. These were the Titans, 12 children, vast in stature, each embodying a fundamental principle of existence. They were not mere characters in a story, but personifications of the forces Greeks saw around them every day. To speak their names was to list the pillars of the universe itself. First was Oceanus, the encircling river believed to surround the known world. To a Greek gazing out at the endless horizon of the sea, Oceanus was not a metaphor but a reality. The living boundary of the earth, a watery belt no sailor could cross. Oceanus fathered thousands of river gods and nymphs, each a spring or stream, each a reminder of his reach. Alongside him was Tethys, his sister and consort, whose nourishing waters fed every river and nurtured every spring. Next came Hyperion, the one who goes above, the Titan of heavenly light. With his consort Rhea, he fathered Helios, the sun, Selene, the moon, and Eos, the dawn. In their family, we glimpse the celestial rhythm of day and night, light and shadow, written into the sky. Coeus and Phoebe formed another pair, embodying intelligence and radiant prophecy. Their descendants, Leto and Asteria, would carry forward the lineage, birthing Apollo and Artemis into the Olympian age. Then there was Creus, an often overlooked Titan, loosely connected with the constellations and the turning of the heavens. His shadowed presence reminds us that not every myth was sharply defined. Some Titans were grand, others obscure, yet all belonged to the cosmic architecture. Iapetus, by contrast, looms larger. He fathered Atlas, bearer of the heavens, Prometheus, the firebringer, Epimetheus, the backward-looking, and Menoetius, the violent. Through Iapetus, the Estines of gods and men would intertwine, and then came Rhea and Themis. Rhea, later remembered as the mother of gods, would bring the Olympians into being. Themis embodied divine order and law, the unspoken rules that bound heaven, earth, and underworld. Her very name became synonymous with justice, invoked in oaths and judgments. Mnemosyne, memory itself, held a subtler role, but one profound. Without memory, there could be no tradition, no myth, no story. It was she who gave birth to the Muses, those 9 daughters who inspired poetry, song, and history. Finally, the youngest, Cronus. Ambitious, cunning, and burdened with destiny, he would become both liberator and tyrant. His sickle would sever the rule of Uranus, and his paranoia would devour his own children. Of all the Titans, Cronus looms largest, a figure both feared and revered, his name lending itself to the very word Chronos, time, the relentless devourer. Though technically distinct, in the popular imagination, Cronus and time merged, giving rise to the image of an aged figure scything down generations. The Titans were not simply a family, they were a cosmic map, earth and sky, sea and light, law and memory, all arranged in human-like kinship. In their births, we see an early attempt to explain the order of the world, to ground abstract forces in a family tree. Scholars still debate whether this system emerged organically from oral traditions, or was codified by poets like Hesiod to impose structure on scattered myths. Was Hesiod a compiler, weaving disparate tales into a grand genealogy? Or was he echoing a shared, older system already known to his audience? The answer remains uncertain. One quirky thread of myth tells us that the Titans were not simply born, but emerged in specific places across the Greek landscape. Some traditions place their birth in Arcadia, a rugged land often tied to primordial myths. Others suggest Crete, later sacred to Zeus, as their cradle. These local claims reflect the Greek habit of rooting cosmic events in their own hills and valleys, making universal myths feel close to home. A villager might point to a mountain and say, "Here is where Hyperion first rose," connecting the divine directly to familiar soil. In art, the Titans are often imagined as vast humanoid figures, but early descriptions are sparse. Unlike the Olympians, who were richly anthropomorphized, the Titans remained more elemental. They were less like neighbors and more like forces, distant yet inescapable. The very word Titan carries a sense of enormity, of something stretching beyond mortal scale. When later generations spoke of titanic effort, titanic size, or titanic pride, they drew directly from these ancient giants. At this point in the mythic story, harmony seemed possible. The Titans were powerful, their parents Gaia and Uranus still united, and the world was young. Yet, beneath the surface lay the seeds of tension. Uranus, fearing his monstrous children, had already locked the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires within Gaia. The Titans themselves, though freer, must have felt the weight of their father's control, and Gaia, enduring the imprisonment of her children, began to simmer with anger. It is important to remember that these myths were not told in isolation, but in a culture where power, family, and succession were ever-present concerns. Kings rose and fell, city-states battled for dominance, and the cycle of overthrow was familiar. In the Titans' birth and Uranus's tyranny, listeners may have heard echoes of their own rulers, their own restless you, the ready to challenge authority. Thus, the birth of the Titans is not only a cosmic moment, but a human one. It is the story of children growing too powerful for the grip of their father, of a mother caught between loyalty and love, of the inevitable rebellion that brews when suppression goes too far. For now the Titans stand in the shadow of Uranus, their full strength unrealized, but Gaia is plotting, and Cronus is sharpening his resolve. Soon the cosmos will tremble under the first great act of defiance. Cronus and the Golden Age. Cronus was the youngest of the Titans, but from the moment of his birth he carried the weight of destiny. Where his siblings accepted Uranus's rule, Cronus grew restless, sharpening his mind against the bars of paternal tyranny. His mother, Gaia, saw in him the spark of rebellion she needed. Her anguish at Uranus's cruelty, the imprisonment of the Cyclopes, and the 100-handed Hecatoncheires within her very body had curdled into fury. She fashioned from adamant, that hardest of mythical metals, a great sickle, its blade curved and cruel. Into Cronus's hands she placed it, whispering rebellion into his ears. The story is visceral, even shocking. On the night Uranus descended to lie with Gaia, Cronus ambushed his father, his sickle flashing in the dark. With one stroke he castrated Uranus, casting the severed flesh into the sea. From the blood that fell upon the earth sprang the Erinyes, avenging spirits who would forever hound oath-breakers and criminals of kinship. From the white foam of the sea where Uranus's genitals landed, Aphrodite would later arise, the goddess of love, born from an act of violence. Thus, in Greek mythology, creation and destruction walked hand in hand. With Uranus dethroned, Cronus became king of the cosmos. He freed his siblings, the Titans, and together they claimed dominion over heaven and earth. Yet, in a pattern that would repeat through myth, liberation quickly hardened into tyranny. Cronus was no gentle ruler. Suspicion and paranoia gnawed at him. Still, the Greeks remembered his reign as the Golden Age, a time of peace and prosperity for mortals. Under Cronus, they said, the earth bore fruit freely, rivers of milk and honey flowed, and humanity lived without toil or war. Hesiod describes this age in Works and Days as a time when men lived like gods, carefree, never aging, untouched by sorrow. Death came gently, like sleep. How can we reconcile the fearful Cronus who devoured his children with this idyllic Golden Age? Scholars still debate whether the Golden Age was originally a separate tradition, later grafted onto Cronus's reign. Perhaps in early myths, Cronus was revered as a fertility god, linked with harvest and abundance. In some rural festivals, Greeks continued to honour him as a benevolent figure long after his fall. At Olympia, for instance, an altar of uncut stones was dedicated to him, a relic of older, pre-Olympian worship. Over time, however, the darker side of his story overshadowed this pastoral image. There is a quirky detail preserved in Roman tradition. During the festival of Saturnalia, honouring Cronus's Latin counterpart, Saturn, social hierarchies were inverted, masters served slaves, gambling was permitted, and revelry reigned. This echoes faintly of that remembered Golden Age, a brief return each year to the world before labour and law, when abundance flowed and authority was suspended. The Romans, inheriting the Greek myths, reimagined Cronus not merely as a tyrant, but as a god of sowing and time, embodying both plenty and decline. Still, shadows crept into the myth. For Cronus, like his father, was haunted by prophecy. Just as Uranus had feared his sons, Cronus learned that one of his own children would rise to overthrow him. Determined to outwit fate, he turned his paranoia into cruelty. One by one, as Rhea bore their children, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, Cronus swallowed them whole, consuming his own offspring in a desperate bid to prevent his downfall. The imagery is chilling. Newborn gods sliding into the darkness of their father's belly, their cries silenced before they could take their first breaths. And yet, the myth insists, the world under Cronus was still a paradise for mortals. Perhaps this is the most telling paradox of all. The gods' struggles were their own, their violence often contained within the divine family, while humanity basked in the accidental peace of their reign. The Golden Age was golden precisely because men were ignored by their rulers, left to live freely without divine interference. Later ages would see gods meddling in human affairs, demanding sacrifice and obedience. Under Cronus, mankind slipped through the cracks of divine drama, and in that neglect found bliss. Fragments of myth suggest alternate visions of this age. In some accounts, the people of the Golden Age did not die at all, but were transformed into spirits who roamed the earth as guardians, watching over mortals with unseen kindness. In others, they sank into the underworld as blessed shades, forever removed from the sorrows of the living. Hesiod calls them daimones, benevolent presences lingering at the edges of human life. These lingering echoes of the Golden Age remind us that myth was not static. To some, it was a cautionary tale of decline, to others, a promise that paradise was never truly lost. It is tempting to read in the Golden Age a nostalgia that never fades. Every culture remembers a time when life was easier, purer, freer. For the Greeks, this longing was embodied in Cronus, a ruler both feared and revered, remembered for abundance yet cursed by his crimes. His reign was not simply about power, it was about time itself, that inexorable flow from youth to age, from plenty to scarcity, from innocence to experience. Cronus devoured his children just as time devours all things. But no tyranny lasts forever. Rhea, weary of losing child after child, would soon conspire to save her youngest son, Zeus. The stage was set for yet another cycle of rebellion, another cosmic overthrow. The Golden Age would end, giving way to the Silver and Bronze, ages of toil and conflict, but also to the birth of a new divine order. For now, though, let us linger in that remembered paradise, when rivers ran sweet, when men lived without labour, when gods kept to their quarrels and the world itself seemed generous. It was fleeting, perhaps more dream than reality, but it remains one of the most haunting images of Greek mythology, an age when mortals lived like gods, and gods devoured their own children. Prophecy of overthrow. The throne of the cosmos is never secure. This was the great lesson already written into the myth of Uranus, whose fall came from his own child's hand, and it was the lesson that would stalk Cronus, even in his glory. Having seized power with the sickle his mother gave him, he might have imagined himself untouchable, a ruler who had bested the sky itself. Yet, as the poets remind us, fate does not spare even kings of heaven. Soon after taking the throne, Cronus heard the words that would unravel his reign, a prophecy that he too would be dethroned by one of his children. The source of the prophecy varies across traditions. Some say it came from Uranus himself, in his agony, cursing Cronus with the same fate he had inflicted. Others insist it was Gaia, weary of watching her children suffer in endless cycles of suppression and vengeance, who warned her son. In either case, the message was clear. Destiny would not be denied. The very pattern of succession, son rising against father, new order replacing the old, was stitched into the fabric of the cosmos. Cronus could wound Uranus, but he could not sever the chain of fate. And so paranoia consumed him. Cronus was clever, but fear makes even clever rulers cruel. Every time Rhea, his sister and consort, bore him a child, he snatched the newborn away. One by one he swallowed them whole, hiding them in the dark prison of his stomach. The image is grotesque. The devourer, the father who fears his children so much he transforms their very existence into food. The Greeks never shied away from such unsettling imagery, for they knew that fear and love, hunger and power often intertwined in the human heart. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades and Poseidon, all swallowed before they could speak their first word. To the Greeks, each of these names would one day resound as great Olympian gods, yet here they were, Tracheion, apt within their father's body, alive but silent. One wonders how the ancients imagined them in that strange prison. Did they converse, like seeds waiting beneath the soil, plotting their own escape? Or did they simply endure, suspended in darkness until deliverance came? Scholars still debate whether this image is symbolic of seasonal cycles, seeds planted and hidden underground, only to burst forth later as life renewed. Cronus's cruelty was more than personal paranoia. It was cosmic repetition. Just as Uranus had hidden his children within Gaia's womb, Cronus now buried his children within himself. The cycle of repression had not ended, it had merely changed form. This, perhaps, is one of the most profound insights of Greek mythology, that history repeats itself, often with cruel symmetry. Fathers become their fathers, tyrants become their predecessors, and fate watches with a patient smile. There is a lesser-known story preserved in Orphic fragments, that suggests Cronus was not merely devouring his children, but attempting to keep their divine essence within him, as though swallowing their power might make him invincible. In this vision, Cronus is not only paranoid but greedy, hoping to consolidate eternity in his own body. Whether this was a fringe belief or a symbolic elaboration, it adds a layer of psychological depth. The tyrant who consumes not just to prevent rebellion, but to become what he fears. The prophecy itself resonates with other traditions. In Mesopotamian myth, the younger god Marduk slays the primordial goddess Tiamat, rising to establish his own reign. In Egyptian lore, Horus avenges himself against Set, continuing the cycle of divine succession. The Greeks were part of this wider Mediterranean tapestry of myths in which cosmic order is always fragile, and younger generations inevitably rise against the old. What sets the Greek story apart is its tragic repetition. Each father repeats the sins of the one before, unable to learn, unable to change. Meanwhile, mortals under Cronus still enjoyed the Golden Age, untouched by their king's paranoia. This sharp contrast, peace on earth, terror in heaven, suggests that the Greeks saw divine struggles as distant, even absurd, when compared with the lives of ordinary men. Their myths acknowledge that power is often most unstable at the top, while those at the bottom go on sowing and reaping, living and dying, scarcely aware of the drama above. The quirky detail that Roman tradition preserves is Cronus's association with time itself. The Latin poets fused him with Kronos, and so the devouring of his children became an allegory for time devouring all things, youth, beauty, even empires. A Roman audience watching Saturn devour his children would see not just a paranoid god, but the inevitability of decline, the gnawing truth that nothing escapes the jaws of time. This interpretation is later than Hesiod's, but it became so powerful that it shaped art for centuries, most famously in Francisco Goya's dark, haunting painting of Saturn devouring his son. And yet, the Greeks always insisted prophecy cannot be avoided. In trying to cheat destiny, Cronus only ensured it. His devouring of his children delayed rebellion, but it also deepened Rhea's despair and sharpened her resolve. She loved her children, and she would not allow them all to vanish into her husband's gut. The prophecy had already set in motion the gears of fate. Soon Rhea would act, and soon Zeus would be born, the child hidden away, the one who would challenge the devourer. For now Cronus sat on his throne, the sickle of Uranus in his hand, the cosmos under his dominion. He was king of heaven and earth, master of a world without toil, guardian of a fragile peace. But within his belly the future stirred, and beyond the horizon the prophecy whispered patient and inevitable. Rhea's secret rebellion. Rhea, sister and consort of Cronus, bore the weight of a mother's grief more than any goddess in myth. Time after time she gave birth, only to have her newborn taken from her arms and swallowed whole by the very man who was both father and tyrant. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, all lost to the cavernous stomach of Cronus, their divine cries muffled by his paranoia. To the world, Cronus remained king of the cosmos, presiding over the Golden Age, but for Rhea, the palace of heaven was a prison of sorrow. And yet, destiny has a way of finding its champions in the quietest acts of defiance. When Rhea conceived again, she resolved that this child would not be devoured. She sought counsel from her parents, Gaia and Uranus, strange allies, for Uranus had once been overthrown by Cronus's own hand. Together they whispered of a plan, a deception that would preserve the infant and ensure the prophecy's fulfillment. When the time came, Rhea retreated in secret to the island of Crete, a land already steeped in myth and mystery. There, in a cave on Mount Ida, or in some traditions on Mount Dicte, she gave birth to Zeus, the youngest of her children and the one destined to become king of gods. The cave itself became sacred for centuries, revered as the birthplace of the Olympian order. Archaeologists have uncovered ancient offerings in Cretan caves, including bronze figurines and libations, suggesting that rituals tied to Zeus's nativity were practiced there from the Minoan era onward. But how to keep the infant safe? Rhea swaddled a stone in cloth, crafting a bundle that mimicked the weight and shape of a newborn. This she presented to Cronus, who, without suspicion, devoured it whole, believing he had cheated fate once more. The image is both tragic and absurd, the most powerful being in the cosmos, deceived by a rock wrapped in rags. Scholars say it says, till debate whether this detail is satire layered into the myth, a way for storytellers to undercut Cronus's tyranny with comic irony. Was the devourer truly so blind, or was it a poetic exaggeration meant to highlight the inevitability of destiny? Meanwhile, the real infant Zeus was hidden in the care of divine guardians. The nymph Amalthea, sometimes imagined as a goat, sometimes as a goat-herding maiden, nursed him with her milk. Her horn, broken by Zeus in playful strength, would become the cornucopia, symbol of unending abundance. Around the cave danced the Curetes, armoured warriors who clashed their spears on shields to drown out the cries of the infant god, ensuring that Cronus never heard him. To this day, echoes of such ritual noise survive in certain Cretan dances and festivals, where synchronized clashing of weapons or drums may well preserve the memory of Zeus's concealment. This tender, secret rebellion contrasts sharply with the cosmic violence that came before. Gaia's rebellion against Uranus was bloody, Cronus's paranoia was grotesque, but Rhea's defiance was maternal, quiet, almost domestic. She outwitted her husband, not with force, but with deception, guided by love for her child. In her hands, resistance became nurture. One quirky variant of the story tells that Zeus was not hidden in Crete, but raised in Arcadia, nursed by a nymph named Cynosura, and protected by sacred bees whose honey sustained him. In some local traditions, even the buzzing of bees was said to mask the infant's cries. Such variations reveal how different regions of Greece sought to claim Zeus's birth, rooting the cosmic myth in their own landscapes. To the Arcadians, their rugged hills were no less worthy of divine nativity than the caves of Crete. In time, Zeus grew strong, hidden from his father's gaze, nourished by nymphs and animals, hardened by the wild. The cave that sheltered him became a symbol of secrecy and promise, a reminder that even the mightiest tyrant cannot guard against the resilience of life. In Zeus's survival, mortals may have seen echoes of their own children hidden from famine, war, or oppression. Every act of concealment, every trick against fate, contained the possibility of renewal. Rhea's rebellion did not end with the deception of the stone. In some versions, she actively plotted Zeus's return, working with Gaia to prepare the moment when Cronus would be forced to disgorge the children he had swallowed. In others, she fades into the background once Zeus is hidden, her role complete. But in all tellings, her courage marks the turning point. Without her defiance, the prophecy would wither, the Olympians would never rise, and the story of Greek mythology as we know it would halt before it truly began. The myth of Rhea's rebellion resonates beyond Greece. In Near Eastern traditions, we find similar tales of mothers protecting children from tyrannical kings. In the Hebrew story of Moses, a mother hides her son from a ruler bent on slaughtering infants. In Egyptian lore, Isis conceals the child Horus from Set, ensuring he will one day avenge his father. Across cultures, the archetype is the same, the mother who defies power to preserve the future. And so, in a cave on Crete, as the Curetes clashed their spears and Amalthea nourished her charge, the seed of rebellion grew. Cronus reigned still, believing himself secure, a king unchallenged. Yet, within his own household, destiny had already turned against him. The infant Zeus was alive, and in his small hands the sickle of fate waited, invisible but inevitable. The The cosmos, once locked under Cronus's shadow, had begun to shift. The cycle of succession, unstoppable and eternal, was stirring again. The Titanomachy begins. For years, Zeus grew in secrecy, hidden from Cronus's gaze, nourished by the wild, and raised in the care of nymphs and guardians. By the time he had reached his full strength, he was not only a formidable god in body, but also in cunning. The time had come for prophecy to unfold, for the cycle of rebellion to stir once more. Where Cronus had once turned against Uranus with Gaia's sickle, now Zeus prepared to turn against Cronus, his own father. But unlike the sudden act of mutilation that toppled Uranus, this rebellion would unfold as a war, an epoch-spanning conflict known as the Titanomachy, the battle between the elder Titans and the younger Olympians, a war that shook the very pillars of heaven and earth. The first step was to free his siblings. With the help of Metis, the Titaness of wisdom and cunning, Zeus devised a plan. He confronted Cronus, who still believed himself unchallenged, and forced him, through guile or potion depending on the tale, to disgorge the children he had swallowed. Out came Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, reborn as if from a second birth. The Olympians, no longer trapped in darkness, stood now beside Zeus, a new generation of gods united against their father. The act itself is rich with symbolism. By vomiting up his children, Cronus quite literally expelled the future he had tried to devour. In trying to prevent prophecy, he ensured it, returning his rivals to the world stronger than before. Some ancient writers suggested that the potion Metis prepared was a simple emetic, others that it was a divine incantation, but the deeper meaning remained clear. Wisdom, not brute force, triggered the beginning of rebellion. Now armed with siblings and allies, Zeus raised the cry of war. The Titans, led by Cronus, would not yield their rule so easily. Brother stood against brother, uncle against nephew, as the cosmos became a battlefield. The war is said to have lasted 10 years, a span of time that in Greek imagination represented not just duration, but completeness, the perfect cycle of struggle before resolution. The very landscape of Greece was woven into this conflict, with Mount Olympus serving as the fortress of the younger gods, and Mount Othrys to the south, as the bastion of the Titans. In later retellings, poets describe the clash in terms of natural disaster. Earthquakes shook Gaia's body as the Titans and Olympians hurled mountains and thunderbolts. The seas boiled, the sky split with fire, and Tartarus itself trembled at the echoes of combat. Hesiod's Theogony gives us one of the most vivid images. The 100-handed giants, when unleashed, hurled boulders 3 at a time, their strength shaking the heavens. These were not battles of sword against sword, but of cosmic force against cosmic force, embodiments of creation colliding in chaos. The symbolism is unmistakable. The Titanomachy represented the struggle between old and new orders, between tradition and change, between the heavy, immovable weight of the Titans and the younger, dynamic energy of the Olympians. Scholars still debate whether this war reflected political realities of early Greece, the overthrow of older cults by newer ones, the rise of patriarchal Olympian worship over older, earth-centered traditions. Was Zeus's victory a mythic echo of social transformation, or merely the natural drama of generational change? Quirky details survive in scattered accounts. Some say the Titaness Themis, embodiment of divine order, sided with Zeus, recognizing that law itself demanded renewal. Others insist that Styx, goddess of the underworld river, brought her children, Nike, victory, Kratos, strength, Zelos, zeal, and Bia, force, to aid the Olympians, cementing their place as Zeus's closest companions. These tales, though minor, reveal how the war was not simply a battle of brute strength, but also a war of alliances, loyalty, and symbolic forces. For mortals, the Titanomachy was both distant and immediate. Though they were not participants, its imagery coloured their understanding of the world. When lightning split the sky, they might imagine Zeus hurling bolts at Cronus. When the earth trembled, they might hear the footsteps of giants. Natural forces became echoes of divine war, reminders that even the landscape was born of struggle. And yet, it was not a war Zeus could win alone. The Titans were too strong, their ranks too deep, their knowledge too ancient. The Olympians needed allies, beings of greater power, long imprisoned. Deep within Tartarus, the Cyclopes and the 100-handed Hecatoncheires languished, buried by Uranus's cruelty and forgotten by Cronus. It was to them that Zeus would soon turn, unlocking the hidden weapons of victory. The Titanomachy had begun. For 10 years the cosmos would tremble with battle, its outcome uncertain, its echoes eternal. Just as chaos gave way to order, and Uranus to Cronus, so too would the future of heaven and earth be decided on fields of fire and stone, and in that struggle Zeus would prove whether he was merely a rebel or truly a king. Monsters and allies of war. The Titanomachy raged across a fractured cosmos, but as the conflict dragged on year after year, neither side could gain decisive victory. The Titans were massive and ancient, their strength immense, their power rooted in the raw forces of nature. The Olympians, though fierce and cunning, lacked the overwhelming might to tip the balance. It was a stalemate, until Zeus remembered those who had been cast aside, imprisoned long ago by Uranus, and left to languish in the abyss of Tartarus. There, deep within that pit, as far beneath the earth as the sky is above it, the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires lay bound. The Cyclopes, Brontes, Steropes, and Arges were master forgers, one-eyed beings whose craft could arm gods with weapons of unfathomable power. The Hecatoncheires, Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges were monstrous giants with 100 hands and 50 heads each, embodiments of uncontainable force. Uranus had feared them, Cronus had ignored them, but Zeus saw their potential. Guided by Gaia, he descended into Tartarus, braving a prison that even the gods dreaded. The myths describe this place as unimaginably grim. Iron gates, walls as thick as night, and a chasm so deep that even an anvil falling for 9 days and nights would not reach its floor. Yet Zeus was undaunted. He broke their chains, and the ancient beings, grateful for their release, pledged their allegiance to him. This was not just a rescue, it was a political stroke, an alliance that brought forgotten power to his cause. From the Cyclopes came gifts of unimaginable potency. To Zeus they gave the thunderbolt, a weapon of crackling fire, forged from the primal forces of storm. To Poseidon they gave the trident, a 3-pronged spear capable of shattering the earth and stirring the seas into fury. To Hades they gave the helmet of invisibility, a shadowy helm that cloaked him from all sig, allowing him to move unseen. These gifts would not merely tilt the balance, they would define the very identities of the gods who bore them. The Hecatoncheires too proved invaluable. With their 100 hands they hurled boulders like hail, 3 at a time, their power shaking heaven and earth. Hesiod, in his Theogony, describes them as the ultimate weapon of chaos, their assaults impossible for even titans to withstand. With their aid, the war became not a contest of equals, but a crushing assault, the old order battered by forces it could not match. Here, mythology weaves its moral thread. Where Uranus and Cronus had seen monsters and imprisoned them, Zeus saw allies. Where others saw danger, Zeus saw opportunity. This ability to turn outcasts into champions, to recognize strength where others saw threat, became one of his defining qualities as king. Scholars still debate whether this theme reflects real-world Greek politics, where alliances with marginalized groups or foreign powers often tipped the scales in war. Was Zeus's liberation of the imprisoned beings a mythic echo of the idea that no power should be wasted, no ally dismissed. Quirky fragments survive that give colour to this stage of the war. In one telling, Briareus the Hundred-Handed was so loyal that Zeus once stationed him as a personal guardian, an unmovable sentinel whose very presence deterred rebellion. Another version says that the Cyclopes not only forged weapons but also taught the Olympians the arts of metallurgy, embedding technology itself into divine warfare. These details, though scattered, suggest that the Titanomachy was not only a clash of raw force, but also of innovation, the younger gods wielding new tools against the stagnant might of the elder generation. The battles themselves were apocalyptic in scale. The Titans hurled entire mountains, crashing them against Olympus, while the Hecatoncheires answered by burying their enemies beneath cascades of stone. Zeus's thunderbolts split the sky, lighting the battlefield with searing fire. Poseidon struck the earth, sending quakes rippling through Gaia's body, seas roaring in rebellion. Hades, unseen beneath his helm, slipped through the ranks of Titans like a phantom, spreading terror and confusion. For mortals, the memory of these cataclysms lived on in every storm, every quake, every volcanic eruption, the echoes of that primordial war. And yet, even amid the chaos, loyalties were not simple. Some Titans sided with the younger gods. Themis, goddess of divine law, recognized that justice required renewal. Mnemosyne, memory, perhaps foresaw the need for a new generation to carry forward the story. Most famously, Styx, the goddess of the underworld river, pledged her allegiance to Zeus at the war's outset, bringing her children Nike victory, Kratos strength, Zelos zeal, and Bia force. These figures became more than symbols, they became Zeus's enforcers, embodiments of the qualities that secured his throne. The war lasted 10 years, but the tide had turned. With the thunderbolt in his hand, Zeus became not just a challenger, but a king in waiting. The Olympians, once hidden and swallowed, now stood armed and resplendent, their weapons blazing, their allies vast and terrifying. The Titans, though mighty, were beginning to falter under the relentless assault of youth, innovation, and liberated power. Still, Cronus fought on, wielding the sickle that had once toppled Uranus. His pride was unbroken, his will fierce. But destiny was closing in. The final confrontation loomed, a battle that would determine not only who ruled the heavens, but also how power itself would be understood for generations to come. The war had begun with rebellion. It would end with conquest, and with the chaining of the very beings who once ruled the cosmos. Zeus ascends Olympus. At last the war reached its breaking point. For 10 long years the cosmos had been torn apart by the clash of Titans and Olympians, their thunderous combat echoing across the mountains, seas and skies. The balance that had held for so long finally gave way when the Cyclopes' weapons and the Hecatoncheires' might tipped the scales beyond repair. One by one, the elder Titans faltered, their immense strength no match for the relentless storm of boulders, thunderbolts and divine cunning hurled against them. Hesiod tells us that the final battle was unlike anything the world had ever known. The earth quaked violently, flames engulfed the heavens, and seas boiled under Poseidon's trident. Zeus unleashed thunderbolt after thunderbolt, until the very air trembled with fire. The Hecatoncheires, each hurling hundreds of stones at once, buried the Titans beneath avalanches of rock. Gaia herself groaned, torn between the agony of watching her children suffer and the necessity of a new order rising. In that fiery storm of destruction, the fate of the cosmos was sealed. The Titans were defeated. Cronus, the once mighty king who had castrated his father and devoured his children, fell to the very sun he had tried to destroy. The sickle of Uranus slipped from his hand, its power broken. But Zeus did not simply kill the Titans. Following the counsel of Gaia and the laws of cosmic balance, he and his siblings imprisoned them deep within Tartarus. There, behind iron gates forged by the Cyclopes, and guarded by the 100-handed Hecatoncheires, the Titans would remain for eternity, banished but not erased. This act is telling. Uranus had buried his children within Gaia, where they writhed in torment. Cronus had swallowed his children, trying to trap them in his own body. Zeus, by contrast, confined his defeated foes but left them intact. He understood that power could not be erased, only contained. Scholars still debate whether this represents a shift in the Greek understanding of authority, that true kingship does not annihilate rivals but controls them, balancing destruction with order. With the Titans chained, Zeus claimed the throne of heaven. Mount Olympus, the soaring peak in northern Greece, became his seat of power. The mountain, its summit, often hidden in cloud, seemed the perfect symbol of divine majesty, remote, untouchable, yet visible from afar. In establishing Olympus as the home of the new gods, Zeus and his siblings created not just a palace, but a cosmic center, a place that defined the boundary between mortal and divine. To secure his reign, Zeus divided the cosmos with his brothers. By lot they cast their domains. Zeus received the heavens and the authority of kingship, Poseidon claimed the seas with his trident, and Hades took the underworld, ruling over the dead with his helm of invisibility. The earth itself and Mount Olympus remained common ground, shared by all. This division, though unequal in appearance, established a balance that would last through the ages, each brother ruling in his own sphere, bound by oaths and the necessity of coexistence. The symbolism is profound. The sky, the sea, the underworld, three realms forming a complete picture of existence. Above, the heavens where storms and stars dwell. Below, the hidden realm of death. In between, the restless sea, both a barrier and a pathway. Humanity lived upon the earth, caught between these realms, forever subject to their rulers' whims. For the Greeks, this tripartite cosmos reflected their world, a people of mountains, sea and sky, who understood that life was shaped by forces above, beneath and beyond. A quirky but intriguing detail tells us that not all Titans were cast into Tartarus. Some, like Oceanus, remained neutral and thus spared. Themis, goddess of divine law, and Mnemosyne, goddess of memory, were not imprisoned, and their roles would continue under the Olympian order. This suggests that Zeus, unlike his predecessors, was not indiscriminate in punishment. He recognized loyalty, valued law, and preserved tradition even as he enforced change. In this, he was not only conqueror, but statesman. The rise of Zeus also brought about new alliances. Styx, who had sided with him from the beginning, was rewarded by making her river the ultimate oath-binding force among the gods. To swear upon Styx became the most sacred promise in Olympus, one that even Zeus himself could not break without ruin. This small but powerful detail illustrates how myth often wove political metaphors into divine narrative. Authority depends not only on strength, but also on the sanctity of law. And so, with victory achieved, Zeus emerged as the unchallenged king of the cosmos. Yet his reign was not only a matter of brute force. He had freed allies where others had imprisoned them, honoured those who supported him, and established a new order that bound gods together through law as much as power. It was a reign forged in war, but tempered by diplomacy, a balance that the Greeks recognised as essential to kingship. Still, the echoes of the Titanomachy never vanished. The mountains, said to have been hurled during the war, were explained as the jagged ranges of Greece. The thunder in every storm was the memory of Zeus's bolts. The tremors in the earth were the lingering struggles of the imprisoned Titans beneath Tartarus. For the Greeks, their landscape was scarred and shaped by this cosmic conflict, a living testimony to the war that gave birth to their gods. The new order had begun, from chaos to Uranus, from Uranus to Cronus, and now from Cronus to Zeus. The pattern of succession continued. But unlike his forebears, Zeus did not merely replace the old with the new. He sought to create a lasting balance, a dynasty that would endure. On Mount Olympus, the 12 gods would soon assemble, each with their domain, each with their story, each a reflection of human hopes and fears. The age of the Olympians had arrived. The age of the Olympians. With the Titans confined to the abyss and Zeus enthroned upon Olympus, a new chapter in cosmic history began. The air that had been thick with smoke and thunder now cleared, revealing a radiant order, a pantheon unlike any that had come before. For the first time, the divine rulers of the cosmos resembled humanity, not only in shape but in temperament. They quarrelled and feasted, loved and hated, punished and rewarded with a vitality that felt startlingly familiar. The Olympians were not remote forces like Nyx or Chaos. They were personalities, gods one could pray to, bargain with and fear. At the heart of this order stood 12, the Olympian gods. Zeus, king of the skies, wielded thunder and authority. Hera, his sister and queen, embodied both majesty and jealousy, protector of marriage, yet perpetually wounded by her husband's infidelities. Poseidon ruled the sea, trident in hand, feared by sailors and courted by cities. Hades, though not often counted among the 12 since he remained in the underworld, held sway over the realm of the dead with stern finality. Beside them stood Hestia, guardian of the hearth, the unseen centre of every home and city, though in later traditions she yielded her place to Dionysus, god of wine and frenzy. Demeter presided over grain and harvest, her gifts making survival possible, her grief echoing in the barren winters. Athena, born in dazzling armour from Zeus's own head, embodied wisdom and strategy, the mind sharpened for war and governance alike. Apollo shone as the god of light, prophecy and music, his twin sister Artemis reigning over the hunt, the wilderness, and the moonlit paths of night. Ares, blood-drenched and impetuous, represented the raw fury of war, while Hephaestus, limping yet ingenious, forged the weapons of gods and heroes alike. Aphrodite, radiant with beauty, swayed hearts and stirred desire, her power subtle yet irresistible. Hermes, quick-footed messenger, guided travellers and tricksters, slipping between realms with laughter in his voice. And last, Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, and madness, brought liberation and terror, his cult unsettling the rigid boundaries of society. It is no accident that the Olympians mirror humanity so closely. Where the primordial forces embodied the foundations of reality, the Olympians embodied its contradictions, love and rage, justice and jealousy, wisdom and folly. They were immortal, yet flawed, divine, yet intimately human. In their stories, the Greeks saw themselves magnified to cosmic scale. Scholars still debate whether this anthropomorphism was a conscious innovation of poets like Homer and Hesiod, or the natural evolution of oral tradition. What is certain is that the Olympians became the most enduring symbols of Greek culture, shaping art, politics, and philosophy for centuries. One curious detail is that the exact membership of the 12 Olympians was never fixed. Different cities and cults substituted one god for another, reflecting local traditions. In some places, Hades counted. In others, Hestia retained her seat. Occasionally, even heroes like Heracles were granted a place among them. This fluidity reflects how mythology was not a rigid canon, but a living system, adapting to the needs of each community. The age of the Olympians was marked not by cosmic war, but by divine drama. Unlike the Titans, who seemed distant and monumental, the Olympians quarrelled like a family at table. Hera plotted against Zeus's lovers. Athena clashed with Poseidon over the patronage of Athens. Ares stormed into battle only to be mocked by his siblings. These conflicts, while sometimes comic, gave myth its lifeblood. For the Greeks, the gods were not perfect ideals, but mirrors of themselves, their struggles a reflection of human passions elevated to divine scale. Quirky tales abound from this age. Hephaestus, spurned by his mother Hera for his deformity, crafted a golden throne as a gift, only to trap her upon it. When the gods begged him to release her, he demanded Aphrodite as his bride. In another tale, Apollo and Poseidon conspired against Zeus himself, building the walls of Troy as punishment when their plot failed. Such stories remind us that even Olympus was not immune to rebellion. Harmony was always precarious, authority always contested. Yet for all their squabbles, the Olympians formed a coherent system of power, each god with their domain, each with their cult, each woven into the fabric of Greek life. Farmers prayed to Demeter for fertile harvests. Sailors offered sacrifices to Poseidon for safe passage. Lovers invoked Aphrodite, warriors Ares, rulers Zeus. Festivals and temples bound communities to these gods, turning myth into ritual and ritual into identity. The Panathenaea in Athens, the Olympics at Olympia, the Dionysia in Thebes. Each celebration reaffirmed the bond between mortals and their gods. Scholars still debate whether the Olympians should be seen as a religious system or as a poetic construct. Was the pantheon truly worshipped as a unified council, or was that a later abstraction? Archaeological evidence suggests that cults were often localized, Athena in Athens, and Apollo at Delphi, Artemis at Ephesus. Yet in literature and storytelling, they coalesced into a single divine family, their council on Olympus serving as a cosmic government that reflected and legitimized human political life. The rise of the Olympians marked a shift not only in divine hierarchy but in cultural imagination. Where the Titanomachy represented raw struggle, the Olympian age represented continuity, a world where gods and mortals shared stories, rituals, and destinies. No longer distant forces, the gods were neighbours, their myths braided into daily life. And yet, even as their rule seemed unshakable, shadows loomed. The defiance of Prometheus, the trickery of Pandora's jar, the wrath of giants, the descent of Persephone, each would test the Olympian order. The story of Greek mythology is never one of perfect peace, but of perpetual tension, a reminder that even divine order is fragile. For now, however, Olympus gleamed. Thunderbolts crowned Zeus's authority, hymns rose in temples, and the gods feasted in their golden halls. The Titanomachy was over, the new age had begun, and humanity found itself living under the gaze of gods who looked and quarrelled like themselves. Prometheus and the gift of fire. Among the Titans who survived the Great War, none stands out more vividly in memory than Prometheus. Though born of Iapetus, one of the elder Titans, Prometheus did not share their fate in Tartarus. He had sided with Zeus during the Titanomachy, recognizing the inevitable victory of the younger gods. Yet this loyalty would prove complicated. For Prometheus, whose very name means forethought, thought not only of gods but of mortals, fragile, shivering beings who tilled the earth and gazed upward with awe. In him, compassion and cunning combined, and it was this blend that would set him on a collision course with Olympus itself. The story begins with the question of sacrifice. After the Titanomachy, when order was restored, Zeus demanded that men offer tribute to the gods, dividing their harvests and livestock in pious ritual. Prometheus, protector of humanity, devised a trick. He slaughtered a great ox and divided it into two heaps. In one, he placed the edible meat and fat, but concealed it beneath the ox's rough, unattractive stomach. In the other, he arranged the bones, polished white, and covered them with glistening fat. When Zeus came to choose, Prometheus urged him toward the shining pile. Zeus, deceived, selected the bones wrapped in fat, leaving the nourishing meat for humankind. This act was not mere mischief, it explained the Greek ritual of sacrifice in which the smoke of burnt bones was offered to the gods while men kept the meat for themselves. Yet the myth also reveals something deeper. The gods could be tricked, and mortals, through cunning, could seize some advantage in a world otherwise dominated by divine power. Prometheus had shifted the balance, however slightly, in favour of humanity. But Zeus, though deceived, was not blind to the insult. Anger flared, and in retribution he denied mankind the gift of fire. Without fire, men could not cook, forge, or protect themselves from the cold. They lived half-lives, fumbling in darkness, their survival fragile. Prometheus, unwilling to see his beloved mortals suffer, resolved to defy Zeus once more. He crept into the heavens, some say into the very workshop of Hephaestus, and stole fire, hiding it in a hollow fennel stalk. Carrying it down to earth, he placed it into the hands of men. Flame flickered for the first time in human hearths, smoke rose into the sky, and humanity's fate was forever changed. Here lies one of the most enduring myths of all time, the theft of fire, the gift that transforms. Fire became more than warmth, it was knowledge, technology, power. To the Greeks, it explained the leap from animal to human, from survival to civilization. Prometheus, like a cosmic teacher, gave mortals the means to rise, to create, to imagine. Scholars still debate whether this myth reflects an ancient memory of mankind's discovery of fire, or whether it is allegorical, a story about the dangers of knowledge. For with fire came both progress and peril. Zeus, enraged at this defiance, unleashed a punishment that remains one of the most haunting in myth. Prometheus was bound to a rock at the edge of the world, sometimes said to be in the Caucasus Mountains. Each day, an eagle, the sacred bird of Zeus, descended to tear at his liver, devouring it as he writhed in agony. Each night, the liver grew back, and with dawn, the torment began anew. This endless cycle of suffering became a symbol of defiance against tyranny, the cost of standing with humanity against divine authority. A quirky variation of the myth tells that in some regions, Prometheus was not punished immediately, but continued to act as a teacher of arts, teaching men writing, architecture, and medicine. In these traditions, he is not merely a thief of fire, but the very bringer of civilization. Some even claimed that clay figurines he moulded were animated by Athena, giving birth to humanity itself. Such versions amplify his role as creator, not just benefactor. The punishment of Prometheus also speaks to the Greek tension between knowledge and hubris. Fire was a blessing, but it also placed mortals closer to the divine, giving them a power that blurred the boundaries between human and God. To Zeus, this was dangerous. Mortals must know their place, dependent on the gods, never equal to them. Prometheus's crime was not merely theft, it was an attempt to raise humanity too high. Yet the Greeks remembered him with admiration as much as pity. Tragedians like Aeschylus cast Prometheus as a heroic figure, a sufferer whose defiance against tyranny carried dignity. Later philosophers even read him as a symbol of reason and science, the spark of human intellect standing against superstition. His myth has echoed far beyond antiquity, through Roman poets, through romantic poets like Shelley, who declared himself Prometheus unbound, even into modern imagination, where fire still symbolizes the leap of human progress. Scholars still debate whether Prometheus's suffering was meant as caution or celebration. Was he a warning against overreaching, or a hero of resistance? The ambiguity is deliberate, for Greek myth seldom offered simple lessons. It held both truths at once, that knowledge is perilous, but also that defiance is noble, and in the background of this tale looms Zeus, whose wrath was not finished. For in punishing Prometheus he also plotted to punish humanity itself. If fire had been, End stolen, another gift would be given, a gift wrapped not in blessing but in curse. Soon Pandora would open her jar, and the sorrows of the world would spill forth. For now, though, the image of Prometheus lingers, a titan chained upon the mountain, defiant even in agony, his gift of fire flickering forever in the hearths of mankind. Pandora and the unleashed evils. The theft of fire had given mortals a power that rivaled the gods. Zeus, king of Olympus, could not allow such defiance to stand unanswered. Punishing Prometheus with eternal torment was one thing, but Zeus also sought to remind mankind of their fragility, to ensure they would never forget who held sway over their fate. Thus he conceived of a new punishment, not a weapon hurled in anger, but a gift wrapped in beauty. If Prometheus had given mankind fire, Zeus would give them Pandora. According to Hesiod, Pandora was the first woman, fashioned by Hephaestus from clay, her form as perfect as any sculpture. Each god contributed a gift. Athena clothed her in shining robes and taught her crafts. Aphrodite bestowed grace and irresistible charm. Hermes gave her a cunning, deceitful mind, and the Horae adorned her with garlands of spring. She was breathtaking, radiant with divine beauty, a wonder no mortal man could resist. Her very name means all-gifted. But hidden within her perfection was the sting of her purpose. She was designed as the instrument of Zeus's vengeance. Zeus placed into her hands a sealed jar, or in later retellings, a box, containing countless evils. In its dark interior lay disease, toil, sorrow, envy, hunger, and all the miseries that would one day plague humankind. Only one thing rested at the bottom, Elpis, hope. Scholars still debate the meaning of this final detail. Was hope a blessing to comfort humanity in suffering, or was it another deception, a cruel delusion that made men endure what they otherwise would not? The ambiguity lingers, as it often does in Greek myth. Pandora was given as a bride to Epimetheus, Prometheus's brother. Despite Prometheus's warnings not to accept gifts from Zeus, Epimetheus, whose name means afterthought, the opposite of Prometheus's foresight, was beguiled. He welcomed Pandora, blinded by her beauty. It is in this moment, when she entered mortal life, that the myth turns tragic. For whether through curiosity, trickery, or fate itself, Pandora lifted the lid of her jar. The consequences were immediate and irreversible. Out flew the evils, scattering across the world like a plague of shadows. Disease settled upon mortals, aging claimed their bodies, envy soured their hearts, and toil bent their backs. From that moment onward, men would labour for bread, women would endure the pains of childbirth, and death would come with suffering. The idyllic ease of the golden age, already fading, was lost forever. Humanity was now bound to sorrow. Yet at the bottom of the jar remained one final thing, hope. Whether it was left as a mercy or a cruel jest is one of the great puzzles of ancient thought. Some philosophers argued that hope is a blessing, the spark that drives men to persist despite hardship. Others suggested that hope is the greatest curse of all, for it compels mortals to endure endless suffering, clinging to illusions of relief. In this, Pandora's jar becomes not only a mythic tale but a meditation on human existence. The myth carried cultural weight in the daily life of the Greeks. Suffering, toil, and inequality were not random accidents, but consequences of divine will, anchored in story. In explaining why life is hard, the Greeks did not turn to abstract theologies of sin, but to mythic narratives of defiance and punishment. Prometheus's theft and Pandora's curiosity became the hinge of human destiny. Through them, mortals were given gifts that were double-edged, fire to advance them, but evils to restrain them. Quirky details survive in regional variations. In one telling, Pandora herself is not a punishment, but a blessing, the mother of all humankind, carrying both virtues and vices in equal measure. In others, it is not Pandora, but another figure, Anesidora, she who sends up gifts, who opens the vessel. These alternative traditions suggest that Pandora's image evolved over time, shaped by attitudes toward women and their role in society. Was she a cautionary tale of female curiosity and disobedience, or a primal mother figure whose actions shaped human fate? Scholars still debate, pointing out that her story, like Eve's in Hebrew tradition, reflects deeper anxieties about gender, power, and the origins of suffering. Archaeology adds further texture. Images of Pandora appear on ancient vases, not always as a bringer of doom, but sometimes as a beautiful, almost divine figure. To some Greeks, she was not merely the bearer of evil, but a necessary balance. Life's joys and sorrows mingled together, inseparable. The jar, too, becomes a powerful metaphor. Just as vessels held grain, wine, or oil, sustaining life, so too did Pandora's jar hold the very essence of human destiny. In the grand flow of mythology, Pandora's act is pivotal. With her, mankind moved irrevocably from innocence into experience, from ease into toil. The balance between gods and mortals shifted once more. Zeus had achieved his purpose. Mortals, though armed with fire, would never be free from suffering. Their lives would always be marked by struggle, a reminder of divine authority. And yet at the bottom of the jar, hope lingers. Perhaps that is the truest gift, fragile, uncertain, but enduring. For even in the darkest times, mortals continued to look forward, to plant seeds, to build cities, to sing hymns to the very gods who had cursed them. Pandora's jar may have unleashed sorrow, but it also left humanity with the will to endure. The Olympians reigned supreme. Prometheus suffered in chains. Pandora's gift had reshaped mankind, and yet unrest still brewed. For the Titans were not the only beings to resent Zeus's power. From the depths of Gaia herself, new enemies would rise, giants who sought to topple Olympus with brute force. The war of succession was over, but the war for survival had only just begun. The Gigantomachy, no throne, no order, no dynasty ever sat secure for long in Greek myth. Just as Cronus had overthrown Uranus and Zeus had overthrown Cronus, so too would new challengers rise to test the Olympian order. This time, however, the rebellion did not come from within the divine family. It came from the raw body of Gaia herself, who, in anger at the imprisonment of her Titan sons in Tartarus, gave birth to a new brood, the giants. Born of earth and blood, massive and terrible, they were destined to hurl themselves against Olympus in a war that came to be known as the Gigantomachy, the battle of gods and giants. The giants were not merely large men, but chthonic beings of immense power. Hesiod describes them as rising from the blood of Uranus when Cronus castrated him. Their bodies monstrous, some with serpentine legs coiling into dragon tails. Their names were many: Enceladus, Alcyonius, Porphyrion, Ephialtes, Pallas, each embodying brute strength or wild fury. They were born not to rule but to challenge, the earth's vengeance made flesh. In later art, the Gigantomachy became one of the most popular themes for sculpture and vase painting, a canvas upon which Greeks imagined the eternal struggle between order and chaos. The war began when the giants, stirred by Gaia's wrath, hurled mountains toward Olympus, piling peak upon peak in an attempt to storm the heavens. The gods, startled by the ferocity of the attack, rallied quickly. Zeus unleashed his thunderbolts, Poseidon shattered the ground with his trident, and Apollo loosed arrows of unerring aim. But these were no ordinary foes. An oracle had foretold that the gods could not win the war without the aid of a mortal. This peculiar condition reveals much about Greek thought. The cosmos was not only the domain of gods but also of men, and even in myth, the destiny of heaven was tied to human hands. That mortar. El was Heracles, son of Zeus and a mortal woman, the greatest hero of Greece. With his bow and unmatched strength, Heracles entered the fray alongside the gods. Together, divine and mortal forces fought in unity against the giants. One by one, the mighty creatures fell. Alcyoneus was slain after being dragged from his native land, where his strength had been invincible. Enceladus, struck by Athena, was buried beneath Mount Etna, his writhing body said to cause the volcano's fiery eruptions. Porphyrion, maddened by lust for Hera, was struck down by Zeus's thunderbolt and Heracles' arrow together. Each death was not only a victory, but an explanation of natural phenomena, volcanoes, earthquakes, storms, traced back to the thrashings of defeated giants. The Gigantomachy thus served a symbolic function, the triumph of civilization and divine order over wild, earthborn chaos. The Olympians, embodiments of culture, law, and human-like governance, faced foes who represented raw, untamed force. This is why Greek artists so loved the theme, carving it into temple friezes at the Parthenon and Pergamon. To portray gods defeating giants was to portray Athens or Greece itself standing firm against barbarism, chaos, or foreign threat. Scholars still debate whether the Gigantomachy was purely mythic, or whether it carried echoes of real wars, perhaps the Greeks projecting their struggles against invading forces into the language of cosmic battle. A curious tidbit tells us that some giants were not purely monstrous, but cunning. Ephialtes, for instance, attempted to scale the heavens by stacking mountains, echoing a theme found in many world myths of hubristic beings trying to storm the sky. In some local tales, Gaia herself grew so furious that she produced herbs meant to make the giants invulnerable, but Zeus, forewarned, forbade the dawn, the moon, and the sun to rise until Heracles had gathered the plants and destroyed them. This strange twist reveals the cosmic scale of the conflict, when even celestial cycles paused for war. The role of Heracles cannot be overstated. Without him, the Olympians would have failed, bound by the prophecy that only with mortal aid could the giants be defeated. This interweaving of divine and human destiny lies at the heart of Greek mythology. Mortals were not merely pawns, they were essential participants in the cosmos. In Heracles, a figure both human and divine, the Greeks saw the bridge between realms, the reminder that even in struggles of gods, mankind had a role to play. When the last giant fell, the earth grew silent again. The Olympians stood victorious, their order secure once more. Yet the scars of the battle lingered in the Greek imagination. Every rumble of earth beneath their feet, every volcanic eruption, every sudden storm, these were reminders that the giants were not fully gone. Beneath mountains they still stirred, their bodies restless, their rage eternal. Scholars still debate whether the Gigantomachy was originally distinct from the Titanomachy, or a later retelling of the same cosmic war. Some suggest that poets and artists split the two for dramatic effect, multiplying battles to reflect the eternal nature of struggle. Others argue that the Gigantomachy arose later, perhaps in the 6th century BCE, as Greek cities projected their cultural anxieties onto mighty Whatever its origins, the Gigantomachy became one of the most potent images of order versus chaos, a mythic metaphor that lived long beyond its telling. Thus ended another great rebellion. The Titans were chained, the giants buried, and Olympus reigned supreme. Yet each victory only reaffirmed a truth the Greeks knew well. Order was fragile, always threatened from below, always reliant on vigilance. For now, however, Zeus's throne stood firm, his rule secure, his dynasty ascendant. The earth itself had risen against him, and still he prevailed, but not all rebellions came in the form of monsters. Some would be subtler, rooted in love, loss, and the turning of the seasons. And in that gentler conflict, the story of a daughter, a mother, and the underworld would reshape the very rhythm of life. Persephone and the underworld. If the Titanomachy and the Gigantomachy were wars of thunder and stone, The tale of Persephone is a quieter, more intimate myth, but no less profound. It is a story of loss and return, of a mother's grief and a daughter's dual existence. A myth that explained not only the mysteries of death, but the cycle of the seasons themselves. Where giants and titans revealed the violence of the cosmos, Persephone's abduction revealed its tender, sorrowful balance. Persephone, daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, was a maiden of springtime, beloved by nymphs, radiant among the meadows. Her laughter, the poets said, made flowers bloom more brightly. But her beauty did not go unnoticed. Hades, ruler of the underworld, longed for a queen to share his shadowed throne. Though stern and often feared, Hades was not the monster later imagination painted him to be. He was, above all, lonely. Zeus, who knew the order of things required a balance between life and death, granted his brother silent permission. And so one day, as Persephone stooped to pluck a narcissus flower, the earth itself split open. From the chasm surged Hades in his dark chariot, seizing the maiden and carrying her into the depths below. The scene is one of the most vivid in Greek myth. Flowers trembling in the wind, a girl's cry echoing across the meadow, and the gaping wound in the earth sealing shut. Her companions, the nymphs, were left stunned, powerless, and in the heavens, Demeter heard her daughter's cry, but did not yet know where she had gone. What followed was a mother's grief that shook the very fabric of the world. Demeter roamed the earth in search of Persephone, neglecting her divine duty. Crops withered, fields lay barren, and famine spread across humanity. In Eleusis, Demeter disguised herself as an old woman and was welcomed by a mortal family. There she revealed Hitson, herself, teaching them secret rites of agriculture and, in time, establishing the Eleusinian Mysteries, one of the most sacred religious traditions of ancient Greece, celebrated for centuries. These mysteries promised initiates a deeper understanding of life, death, and rebirth, all tied to the sorrow and return of Persephone. Zeus, confronted with the crisis, could not ignore the famine that threatened mankind. Without humanity, there would be no sacrifices, no prayers, no civilization to sustain the gods. He dispatched Hermes to the underworld to negotiate Persephone's release. Hades, bound by necessity, agreed, but not without a final cunning act. He offered Persephone a handful of pomegranate seeds. She ate them, and by that small act her fate was sealed. For to taste the food of the underworld was to bind oneself to it, and so a compromise was struck. Persephone would spend part of the year with her mother, returning each spring to bring flowers and fruit to the earth. But part of the year she would remain with Hades, queen of the underworld, her absence marking the barren winter. Thus the Greeks explained the rhythm of the seasons, life and death, growth and decay, joy and loss, woven into a single eternal cycle. The myth resonated deeply with agricultural societies. To plant seeds is to bury them, to watch them vanish beneath the earth, like Persephone descending to Hades. But in spring they return, reborn, just as she returns to Demeter. Death and renewal, sorrow and joy, these were not contradictions but twin truths of existence. In Persephone's cycle, the Greeks saw their own lives mirrored, their own hope of something beyond death, hinted at. Quirky details survive from local variations. In one, Persephone was not seized by force but wooed, and she chose Hades willingly, suggesting a darker but more consensual union. In another, her abduction took place not in a meadow but near Enna in Sicily, a region that later became sacred to her cult. Even today, the fields around Enna are carpeted with wildflowers in spring, a living echo of her myth. Scholars still debate whether Persephone's tale reflects an older pre-Olympian goddess of fertility assimilated into the Olympian pantheon. Some suggest that she and Demeter once represented a single figure, mother and maiden aspects of a cyclical earth goddess, later divided into two by mythmakers. If so, the story of abduction may have been a later way of dramatizing the eternal cycle of growth and decay, binding human memory to natural law. The Eleusinian mysteries, tied to this myth, were among the most profound religious experiences of antiquity. Unlike the public festivals of Olympus, these rites were secret, their details carefully guarded. Initiates were promised comfort in facing death, a sense that life did not end in shadow, but in renewal. The myth of Persephone became not only an explanation of seasons, but a source of hope, a ritual assurance that death itself was not final. And yet, the story remains deeply human. At its heart is a mother grieving for her lost child, and a daughter caught between two worlds, never fully belonging to either. Demeter's anguish, Persephone's duality, Hades' loneliness, all echo emotions that are timeless. Unlike the cosmic wars, this myth speaks in whispers rather than thunder, and perhaps for that reason it endured most deeply. The age of the Olympians was not only about thunderbolts and giants, but about cycles, compromises, and grief. In the tale of Persephone, we glimpse the tenderness and fragility of divine order, a remin, that even gods are bound by loss. And as spring returned to Greece each year, fields green and flowers blooming, the people saw in every stalk of grain the proof of the story. Persephone had risen, life had triumphed again, and hope endured beneath the shadow of death. The loves of Zeus, for all his thunderbolts, councils, and wars. Zeus was never remembered solely as the ruler of Olympus. He was also remembered, often more vividly, as a god of relentless desire, whose countless affairs shaped not only the divine world, but the mortal one as well. No other figure in Greek mythology left behind such a sprawling web of liaisons. From goddesses and nymphs to mortal queens and shepherdesses, Zeus's loves produced a host of children, many of whom would become heroes, kings, or founders of entire dynasties. His passions were not idle distractions, they rippled outward, altering the course of myth and history. Some unions were with fellow Olympians. His marriage to Hera, queen of the gods, embodied both majesty and strife. Though she presided over marriage itself, Hera was perpetually wounded by Zeus's infidelities, and her wrath often fell not upon her husband, but upon his lovers and their children. This paradox, Hera as both dignified protector and jealous avenger, gave Greek storytellers endless material. Their divine quarrels mirrored the tensions of human marriages, writ large across the heavens. But Zeus's affections extended far beyond his throne. With Mnemosyne, goddess of memory, he fathered the 9 muses, patrons of art and song. With Leto he fathered Apollo and Artemis, twin pillars of Greek culture, light and prophecy, hunt and moon. With Demeter he fathered Persephone, weaving even the cycle of the seasons into his tangled web. These divine liaisons bound Olympus together in complex kinship, making every god and goddess both sibling and rival. It was his mortal loves, however, that carried the most lasting consequences for human history. With the mortal Semele, Zeus fathered Dionysus, god of wine and ecstasy. Their story is tinged with tragedy. Tricked by Hera, Semele demanded to see Zeus in his full divine form. The sight, Insai, narrated her, yet Zeus saved the unborn Dionysus by sewing him into his own thigh until birth. With Danae imprisoned in a bronze chamber, Zeus appeared as a shower of golden rain, fathering Perseus, who would one day slay Medusa. With Europa, he came disguised as a bull, carrying her across the sea to Crete, where she bore Minos, future king of the island. With Alcmene, he fathered Heracles, whose labours would become legend. Each affair carried symbolic weight. Danae's impregnation by golden rain spoke to the fertile power of wealth and divine blessing. Europa's abduction by bull evoked the crossing of seas and the mingling of cultures, a myth so enduring that the very continent of Europe bears her name. The story of Leda, whom Zeus approached in the form of a swan, produced children like Helen of Troy, whose beauty would ignite the greatest war of myth. In each tale, Zeus was not simply a philanderer, but a force of destiny, weaving divine blood into the mortal world, ensuring that heroes carried a spark of Olympus within them. Quirky variations abound. In some regions, Zeus's union with Hera was retold, not as a sacred marriage, but as a comical struggle, Hera resisting, Zeus pursuing, their quarrel ending in laughter. In Arcadian lore, Zeus took the form of a serpent to mate with Demeter, a strange and unsettling union that produced Persephone. In Crete, local myths insisted that Zeus himself had mortal origins, born and buried there, and that his many loves were echoes of fertility rituals tied to the land. These regional tales remind us that mythology was never uniform, but constantly reshaped to fit local landscapes and beliefs. The sheer number of Zeus's affairs has long puzzled readers. Was he a symbol of male dominance, projecting the authority of kings onto the divine? Or was he a fertility figure ensuring abundance through his countless unions? Scholars still debate. Some argue that his liaisons reflect the spread of Zeus's cult across different regions, each local community attaching its own story of divine fatherhood to legitimize its lineages and heroes. In this way, Zeus became not just king of gods, but ancestor of nations. Hera's role in these myths adds another layer of complexity. Far from silent, she became an active agent of opposition. She persecuted Heracles throughout his life, sending serpents to his cradle, madness into his mind. She harried Io, transformed into a heifer, with a tormenting gadfly. Yet even in her wrath, Hera shaped destinies as much as Zeus did. Their divine marriage, full of betrayal and vengeance, became a mythic reflection of the tensions between order and chaos, fidelity and desire. The loves of Zeus also reveal something essential about the Olympians, their closeness to humanity. Unlike distant gods, who remained aloof, Zeus descended constantly into the mortal world, blurring the line between divine and human. His affairs did not merely produce children, they produced heroes who bridged the gap between realms. Perseus, Heracles, Minos, Helen, all carried in their veins the mingling of mortal struggle and divine power. In them, mortals could see both their own potential and the favour, or meddling, of the gods. And yet, for all his grandeur, Zeus was not untouchable. His infidelities brought endless strife into his own household, making him at once supreme and vulnerable. The myths remind us that even kings of heaven are bound by the consequences of desire. Every affair left echoes, wars fought, heroes born, tragedies unfolded. Zeus's passions were not privance, 8 indulgences, but engines of myth itself. Thus, the age of the Olympians was shaped not only by thunderbolts and councils, but by embraces and betrayals, by love affairs that spanned heaven and earth. In Zeus's loves, the Greeks found explanations for their greatest heroes, their fiercest conflicts, their deepest sorrows. He was the father of gods and men, not only by decree, but by desire. But heroes, once born, must act, and soon the stage of mythology would shift from divine quarrels to mortal struggles, from the halls of Olympus to the fields and seas where men contended with monsters and fate. The age of heroes was dawning, and the children of Zeus and his kin would step forward to claim their place in legend. The age of heroes, with the Olympians enthroned and Zeus's many loves scattering divine blood into the mortal world, the stage of mythology shifted from cosmic wars to human endeavours. The Titans had fallen, the giants lay buried, Pandora's jar had scattered sorrows upon mankind, but in this new era heroes rose. They were mortals touched by divinity, born of unions between gods and men, and they carried within them both human fragility and immortal spark. This was the age of heroes, the golden tapestry of myths that the Greeks wove into their identity, their art, and their very sense of history. Foremost among them stood Heracles, son of Zeus, and Alcmene. His strength was unmatched, his labours legendary. Tormented by Hera from the cradle, he slew serpents as an infant, fought lions, wrestled rivers, and even descended into Hades to drag Cerberus, the three-headed hound, into daylight. Each labour was more than a feat. It was a metaphor for mankind confronting the forces of nature, chaos, and death itself. In Heracles, Greeks saw both suffering and triumph, the paradox of the hero, cursed by divine wrath, yet immortalized by divine favour. After his labours, he ascended to Olympus itself, becoming not only a hero, but a god. Perseus, too, shone among these demigods. Born of Danae, visited by Zeus in a shower of gold, he grew to slay Medusa, the Gorgon, whose gaze turned men to stone. With Hermes' winged sandals and Athena's mirrored shield, Perseus triumphed where others had fallen, proving that cunning could match monstrosity. He rescued Andromeda from the sea monster, founding dynasties that would stretch across Greece. For a culture that valued wit as much as strength, Perseus embodied the clever hero, the one who turned tools and timing into victory. Then came Theseus, the Athenian champion, who braved the labyrinth of Crete to slay the Minotaur. With the thread of Ariadne guiding him, he navigated darkness and found triumph, freeing Athens from tribute to the Cretan king. Theseus was not merely a slayer of beasts, he was a civic hero, a founder of cities and institutions. In his myth, Athenians saw their own self-image reflected, rational, brave, the builders of order. Jason and the Argonauts carried the hero's journey to the seas, setting sail aboard the Argo in search of the Golden Fleece. Their voyage was a kaleidoscope of trials, harpies, clashing rocks, sirens, that echoed mankind's exploration of the dangerous seas that surrounded Greece. Jason himself was flawed, dependent upon Medea's cunning, and his story ended in tragedy. Yet the Argonauts' voyage stood as a collective epic, a reminder that heroes often worked in company, not isolation, each contributing to a shared quest. And beyond them stretched countless others: Bellerophon, who tamed Pegasus and slew the Chimera; Atalanta, swift-footed huntress, who joined the Caledonian boar hunt; Orpheus, whose music charmed gods and monsters alike; Achilles, the swift-footed, whose wrath at Troy shaped Homer's Iliad; Odysseus, cunning wanderer, whose trials at sea embodied resilience and wit. Each hero was distinct, but together they formed a chorus of human greatness touched by divine spark. Quirky details add texture to this heroic age. Heracles, despite his labours, was prone to folly, once killing his music teacher in a fit of rage. Bellerophon, triumphant in battle, tried to fly Pegasus to Olympus, only to be cast down, a warning against hubris. Theseus abandoned Ariadne on Naxos, a betrayal softened only by Dionysus making her his bride. Even heroes, the myths remind us, were flawed, their greatness shadowed by error. The Age of Heroes was not only a poetic creation. For the Greeks, it was also a part of their history. Genealogies linked real kings and cities to these legendary figures, giving them divine ancestry. The line of Heracles, for instance, was claimed by Sparta's royal family, legitimizing their rule. Thebes, Athens, Argos, all traced their origins to heroes, blending myth with memory. Scholars still debate whether these tales preserve dim echoes of real Bronze Age leaders, their deeds magnified into legend, or whether they are purely symbolic constructs. But for the Greeks, history and myth were inseparable. This age also carried a philosophical weight, where gods embodied eternal powers, heroes embodied the mortal condition. They suffered, they fought, they died. Their stories were not only of victory, but of struggle, exile, betrayal, and loss. In their triumphs, mortals could aspire. In their downfalls, they could find caution. To be heroic was to live intensely, even if briefly, to burn with such brightness that one's memory would never fade. The age of heroes gradually converged toward a single climax, the Trojan War. There, nearly every strand of heroism gathered: Achilles, Odysseus, Agamemnon, Hector, Helen, all bound into the greatest epic of Greek tradition. But before we arrive at those fateful shores, the age of heroes itself stands as a bridge between gods and men. The Olympians still reigned, but their stories now intertwined with mortal destinies, shaping the world not from afar, but through the lives of their children. The gods had fought for dominion of the cosmos. The heroes would fight for glory, love, and legacy. Together they gave the Greeks a mythology that spanned heaven and earth, eternity and time, divine order and human frailty, the Trojan War and divine intrigue. If the age of heroes had many strands, the Trojan War was the loom upon which they were woven together. It was the crucible where nearly every great hero, Achilles, Odysseus, Ajax, Hector, faced their destiny, and where the gods themselves meddled openly in human affairs. The war was not just a battle between mortals, it was a theatre in which divine jealousies, grudges, and alliances played out in human blood. To the Greeks, the Trojan War was not only a legendary conflict, but a lens through which they understood heroism, mortality, and the inscrutable will of the gods. Its origins, fittingly, lay not in politics or land, but in beauty and desire. The story begins with a wedding, the marriage of Peleus and the sea goddess Thetis. All the gods were invited except Eris, goddess of strife. Angered, she tossed into the banquet a golden apple inscribed with the words, "For the fairest." Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite each claimed it, and their dispute became the first spark of the war. Zeus, unwilling to choose among them, appointed Paris, Prince of Troy, as judge. Each goddess offered him a bribe. Hera promised power, Athena promised wisdom and victory in war, and Aphrodite promised the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris, swayed by desire, awarded the apple to Aphrodite. The beautiful woman was Helen, already married to Menelaus, king of Sparta. Paris, aided by Aphrodite, abducted her, whether by persuasion or force depends on the telling, and carried her to Troy. Thus began the quarrel of kings and gods alike. Agamemnon, brother of Menelaus, assembled the greatest host Greece had ever seen. 1,000 ships sailed east, carrying warriors like Achilles, Odysseus, Ajax, and Diomedes. Yet the war was never merely mortal. The gods themselves took sides. Hera, Athena, and Poseidon sided with the Greeks, still angry at Paris's judgment. Aphrodite, Apollo, and Ares favoured Troy. Zeus, though striving for balance, could not resist the pleas of Thetis, mother of Achilles, and often tilted fate in subtle ways. The battlefield became a chessboard where divine hands moved mortal pieces. The Iliad of Homer captures the war not as a tale of simple conquest, but as a meditation on rage and destiny. Achilles, the greatest warrior of Greece, sulked in his tent after Agamemnon insulted him, and his absence nearly doomed the Greeks. Hector, Prince of Troy, stood as the noblest defender of his city, fighting with dignity, though knowing fate was against him. The gods intervened constantly, Athena guiding a spear, Apollo deflecting an arrow, Aphrodite shielding Paris. In one vivid scene, Hera seduces Zeus to distract him while Poseidon aids the Greeks, a reminder that even the king of gods could be swayed by desire. Quirky anecdotes surface throughout. When the Greek warrior Diomedes raged across the battlefield, Athena granted him the power to wound even gods. He struck Aphrodite on the wrist, sending her fleeing to Olympus, and later clashed with Ares himself. This inversion, mortal striking God, was rare and shocking, a moment when the boundaries between divine and human blurred. Elsewhere, the trickster Odysseus dreamed up the famous wooden horse, a symbol of cunning triumphing over brute force. The war lasted 10 years, yet much of it was a stalemate. For the Greeks, this long duration mirrored the slow grind of real sieges, like the Bronze Age conflicts at cities such as Hattusa or Ugarit. Scholars still debate whether the Trojan War reflects a real historical event, perhaps a memory of battles around Troy in the late Bronze Age. Archaeological excavations at Hizalik in modern Turkey reveal layers of destruction that could match the era. Was the war mythologized history or pure epic invention? The question remains open, but to the Greeks it hardly mattered. The story had become their shared cultural epic. The climax of Homer's Iliad is not the fall of Troy, but the duel between Achilles and Hector. Hector, bound by honour, faced Achilles knowing he could not win. Their combat was swift, Hector slain, his body dragged behind Achilles' chariot. Yet the epic ends not with triumph, but with pity. Priam, aged king of Troy, enters the Greek camp to beg for his son's body. Achilles, moved by the grief of a father, returns it. For a brief moment, rage gives way to compassion, and the story ends in humanity, not conquest. But the war itself did end, and with trickery. Odysseus's wooden horse, brought into the city as an offering, released Greek warriors by night. Troy burned, its temples desecrated, its people slaughtered or enslaved. Aeneas, guided by the gods, fled to found a new destiny in Rome, a reminder that myths are never isolated but woven into one another. The Trojan War was more than a myth of battle. It was a meditation on fate, on the cost of anger, on the meddling of gods in mortal lives. It showed that even the greatest warriors could fall, that even kings were pawns of divine quarrels, that even gods could be petty and divided. For centuries, the Greeks looked to the war not as a simple tale of victory, but as a mirror of their own struggles, their own when questions about honour, mortality and meaning. And yet, as the smoke cleared and Troy fell, a new shift began. For the Olympians, the war was a moment of triumph and meddling, but for mortals it was devastation. The age of heroes, glorious though it was, carried within it the seeds of decline. As philosophy and empire dawned, the gods themselves would slowly begin to fade. The decline of the gods. The smoke of Troy still drifted in the imagination of poets when the Greeks began to look inward, to question not only the fates of heroes, but the very nature of the gods themselves. The Olympians had triumphed over titans, giants, and men alike. They had interfered in war, shaped dynasties, and ruled from their high halls on Olympus. But immortality in story is not the same as immortality in belief. Slowly, the bright figures who had once commanded temples and hymns began to fade, their authority challenged not by monsters or rival gods, but by shifting human thought and the march of history. The seeds of decline were sown in the Greek mind itself. By the 6th century BCE, philosophers in Ionia began to ask whether thunder truly was Zeus's bolt, or merely a natural phenomenon. Thales looked to water as the origin of all things. Anaximander spoke of the boundless. Heraclitus saw fire as eternal. These thinkers did not deny myth outright, but reinterpreted it, turning gods into symbols or discarding them altogether. Where once Nyx and chaos explained the void, now abstract principles and rational inquiry did. The stories of Hesiod and Homer remained beloved, but they were no longer taken at face value. Tragedians too reshaped the gods. In the plays of Euripides, divine figures often appear capricious, cruel, or absurd. When Aphrodite condemns Hippolytus, or when Dionysus tricks Pentheus, the gods seem less like moral rulers and more like dramatic devices. Mortals suffer not for cosmic justice, but because the gods are petty. The audience, sophisticated and skeptical, could thrill to the drama while quietly questioning the justice of Olympus. Scholars still debate whether this was sacrilege or simply the natural evolution of myth into literature, but the effect was clear. Reverence gave way to irony. Meanwhile, the spread of Greek colonies across the Mediterranean carried their gods abroad, mingling them with foreign traditions. In Egypt, Zeus was fused with Amun, becoming Zeus Ammon, worshipped at oases and oracles. In Anatolia, he was linked with storm gods of the Hittites. Aphrodite merged with Near Eastern goddesses like Ishtar and Astarte, deepening her associations with love and war. This blending enriched Greek religion, but also diluted its boundaries. The gods became more universal, but less distinctly their own. When Rome rose to power, it adopted the Greek pantheon wholesale, renaming Zeus as Jupiter, Hera as Juno, Athena as Minerva, and so on. Roman poets like Ovid retold the myths in Latin, ensuring their survival, but also reshaping them for a new audience. To the Romans, the gods were less immediate presences and more embodiments of civic virtues and cosmic order. Jupiter thundered not from Olympus, but from the Capitoline Hill, protector of the empire. Myth had shifted from religion into cultural heritage, from lived belief into tradition. Quirky anecdotes illustrate this transition. At Dodona, one of the oldest oracles of Zeus, priests once interpreted the rustling of oak leaves as divine speech. By the classical age, travellers recorded the practice with curiosity but little awe, as if visiting a museum. In Rome, Saturn's temple was the state treasury. His myth remembered each December in the revels of Saturnalia, half festival, half parody of old faith. The gods remained on calendars and coins, but they were no longer the trembling mysteries of Hesiod's age. The true turning point came with philosophy and later Christianity. Plato reimagined the gods as moral archetypes, dismissing Homer's tales of their lusts and quarrels as unworthy. Aristotle sought a prime mover, a god unlike Zeus, not quarrelsome but pure intellect. By the time of Stoics and Epicureans, belief in the Olympians had become a matter of personal piety rather than universal truth. Epicurus declared the gods existed but were indifferent, living in perfect detachment, not meddling in human affairs. The Olympians were not overthrown, but slowly starved of fear and reverence. And then, in the early centuries of the Common Era, Christianity spread through the empire. With its insistence on one God, on moral clarity, on a saviour who triumphed not by thunderbolts but by sacrifice, it offered a stark alternative to the tangled passions of Olympus. Temples were abandoned or rededicated, sacrifices ceased, and the old gods slipped into silence. By the 4th century CE, with Constantine's conversion and Theodosius's decrees, the Olympians were no longer worshipped but remembered. Still, they were never truly gone. The myths endured in poetry, art and storytelling. While belief waned, imagination kept them alive. Renaissance painters would crown Zeus again with thunder, sculptors would carve Aphrodite anew, poets would sing of Prometheus and Heracles. Even as gods, they faded. As symbols, they became immortal. Scholars still debate whether the Greeks ever believed in their myths literally or always saw them as metaphor. Perhaps both are true. Myths are never only religion, never only fiction. They are vessels of meaning, shaped to fit the needs of each age. Thus, the decline of the gods was not a sudden fall, but a slow transformation. From powers of storm and sea, they became characters of literature, then icons of art, then archetypes of psychology. They no longer ruled the cosmos, but they ruled memory. Zeus still lifted his thunderbolt, but now in marble rather than sky. Hera still glared at her rivals, but now in painted fresco rather than divine council. The Olympians had been dethroned not by rebellion, but by time, reason, and change. Yet even as they faded, one truth remained: their stories would outlast their temples. And so, at the twilight of their worship, the gods passed into legend, into metaphor, into the imagination of every generation that came after. The myths had begun with chaos, had crowned Zeus, had birthed heroes and wars, and now they settled into something quieter, enduring not in faith, but in memory. But memory has power, and in that enduring memory, Greek mythology never truly ended. It became legacy, enduring legacy of myth. The Olympians no longer sat in their golden halls, their temples long abandoned, their altars cold. Yet Greek mythology did not vanish with the fading of their worship. Instead, it flowed into new vessels, reshaping itself through time. Myths that once explained thunder and harvest, love and grief, came to embody philosophy, psychology, literature, and art. The gods lost their temples, but they found new immortality in the human imagination. The Renaissance rediscovered them first with fervour. Artists in Florence and Rome lifted Apollo's lyre, Aphrodite's beauty, and Zeus's thunder into marble and paint. Botticelli's Birth of Venus gave new life to Aphrodite's foam-born arrival, while Michelangelo's muscular gods recalled the Titans in their vigour. Poets like Dante and later Milton wove Olympian figures into Christian visions, no longer as objects of worship, but as symbols of passion, vice, or virtue. Their survival proved a curious truth: myths do not die, they adapt. In literature, they became metaphors for human psychology. Prometheus, once chained on a mountain, was recast as the defiant spirit of enlightenment, his fire the spark of science and rebellion. Pandora's jar, once a vessel of divine punishment, became a metaphor for curiosity, danger, and the fragile promise of hope. Narcissus gazed into his pool, not only in Ovid's tale, but in Freud's vocabulary, giving name to self-love turned obsession. In this way, the Olympians slipped quietly into the language of the human mind. Quirky survivals still surface in unexpected places. Days of the week carry the names of gods. Thursday for Thor, but also linked to Zeus through Jupiter. The very continent of Europe still bears the name of Europa, carried away by Zeus in the form of a bull. Volcanoes in Sicily were said to rumble with the buried Enceladus. Even now, maps, calendars, and constellations remain haunted by their stories. Scholars still debate what gives these myths their enduring power. Are they merely the accidents of cultural transmission, preserved by poets and schools? Or do they speak to something deeper, archetypal patterns of human life that recur across ages? The jealous queen, the wandering hero, the trickster who steals fire, the mother mourning her child. These are roles as old as humanity, and the Greeks gave them names and faces that endure. Modern storytelling continues the legacy. From novels to films, from fantasy epics to superhero sagas, echoes of Olympus resound. Zeus's thunder lives in every storm-wielding hero, Athena's wisdom in every strategist, Ares' rage in every warlord. Contemporary retellings, from Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson novels to blockbuster films, place the old gods into new settings, proving their vitality in shaping modern imagination. Where once they dwelled on Olympus, now they stride across pages and screens. Perhaps the greatest legacy lies in their contradictions. The gods were not paragons of perfection, but mirrors of humanity. They loved and lied, punished and forgave, ruled and quarrelled. Their flaws made them memorable, their dramas made them relatable. The Greeks understood that to tell stories of flawed gods was to tell stories of themselves, magnified to cosmic scale. That paradox, immortal yet flawed, divine yet human, has kept them alive long after belief faded. From chaos to cosmos, from Uranus to Cronus, from Cronus to Zeus, the myths unfolded as a cycle of struggle, rebellion, and renewal. From Zeus's loves came heroes, and from heroes came wars that shaped the Greek imagination. From war came decline, and from decline came legacy. The arc of Greek mythology is not just a tale of gods, but a reflection of human history itself: rise, struggle, fall, remembrance. Even now, when we no longer pour libations to Zeus or weave garlands for Demeter, we still live within the echoes of their stories. We still speak of titanic effort, of narcissism, of Pandora's box. We still look to the sky for constellations named after their myths. The gods of Olympus may no longer be worshipped, but they remain companions in language, art, and imagination. In the end, perhaps that is the true immortality. Not the thunderbolt or the temple, but the story itself. As long as we tell the tale of chaos and Gaia, of Cronus and Zeus, of Prometheus's fire and Persephone's return, the gods endure, not as rulers, but as memory, myth, and metaphor. And so the curtain falls, not with the silence of oblivion, but with the echo of voices that never fade. The Greeks told stories to explain their world. We keep telling them to explain ourselves. In every retelling, every painting, every whispered name, the myths live again. The age of gods has ended. The age of story never will. Conclusion. Greek mythology begins in darkness, in chaos, in the yawning void. From that emptiness emerged Gaia and Uranus, the Titans, the Olympians, and at last the flawed yet vibrant family of gods who shaped the ancient imagination. Their stories explain thunder and famine, war and love, but they also explore questions that remain timeless. Why do we suffer? What does it mean to be mortal? How do power and desire shape the world? Across 20 sections, we have traced the arc from creation to decline, from the cosmic to the human, from gods who devoured their children to heroes who sought glory at Troy. And though the temples have fallen silent, the myths remain. They live in our words, our art, our psychology, our dreams. The Greeks gave their gods human flaws, and in doing so, they gave us a mirror, one that still reflects us today,